Good morning again. I'm so pleased to introduce to you Grace Whiting with the National Alliance for Caregiving. She's going to talk about some studies that her organization has done around caregiving and also kind of solicit some insight from all of you for a project we're collaborating on that would be the first of its kind study of caregiving in the rare disease community. So please help me welcome Grace Whiting to the stage. Thank you.
Yeah, so before we get started, I know Kim had said this. I'm wondering if y'all can come in a little bit closer. I want to do an activity of sorts. Do we have any people who are tweeters in the audience? A couple. Okay, so I'm going to hop down if I'm allowed to wander away. So if you can tweet why caregiving matters, and write it down. Yeah, that would be great. And I have a couple others if other folks want to tweet why caregiving matters. And I have some markers. You're welcome to keep the markers. Here we go. Traveling over here, I'd like to encourage you guys to commute closer if you're able. Oh, I see, no free. Okay. And then I have a couple others if folks want to tweet. But one of the things I want to do to sort of begin the conversation is talk a little bit about caregiving. So I think when we talk about patient advocate, even that word patient advocate doesn't take into account that a caregiver is slightly different, has different needs than the person that they're caring for. It puts that person in context of being someone who's working on behalf of the patient, but it doesn't really encompass everything a caregiver does that's sort of outside of what you do to help someone who's seeking medical care. And about 2 years ago, I was at the White House for an event on caregiving and persons in the military. And I was standing at the White House. I just heard the First Lady speak. I had heard Senator Elizabeth Dole speak. I had heard Rosalind Carter speak. And we're here in this beautiful setting, right? And we have these delicious hors d'oeuvres, you know, and everybody's, oh my gosh, right, you know, we're at the White House, and you're standing there, you're looking out the window, and I was standing next to a caregiver, and I said, isn't this amazing, right, that we're in the White House? And she said, all I can think about is that my husband is back in the hotel room, and that I'm here, you know, without him. And so when we talk about caregivers and what it means to have to care for somebody else, we're talking about, as you know, because many of you probably are caregivers, people who are incredibly selfless, who don't think about taking time for themselves, and in doing that sometimes forget that in order to care for someone else, you have to be able to care for yourself first. So what I want to do is talk about why this matters, not just from an individual level, but from a public policy standpoint, and what we can do to make the case to members of Congress, to people in federal agencies, to people who run insurance companies and healthcare companies about why we need to pay more attention to family caregiving. So before I get started, I'm wondering, of the people in the room, can you raise your hand if you're caring for somebody? Do a couple of you want to share the person that you're caring for? Somebody want to tell us?
I'm not going to go on, but it's a whole process, and everything that people say about putting your own medical care on the side burner is true. I hadn't had a physical in 3 or 4 years. I hadn't seen the dentist in 3. When someone is fighting for their life on a daily basis, it's very difficult to say, hey, I need to take care of me. And that's as much as I want to say right now.
Well, I think you raised an important point, right? That caregiving is part of your identity. So as that changes, it changes your relationship with your loved ones. It changes your relationship with your spouse, especially if you're caring for your spouse. And so one of the things, if I can figure out how to work this, I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about what the research says. And that's important because, as you know, we have to do a lot of education and patient advocacy to explain what the issue is and why it matters. Just by way of background, I'm here with the National Alliance for Caregiving. If I didn't say it already, my name is Grace. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships there. And we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We were founded in the mid-90s, and our mission is to basically quantify, to explain what caregiving is through public policy research, and then to use that research to help drive innovation and advocacy and awareness, both in the United States and internationally. So this is the big question, I think, is who cares for the caregivers? And how do we describe what it is that caregivers are going through so that we can say to groups like the FDA or Congress or the President, this is what's important for caregivers? I want to start with a little bit of a case study. So how many of you have ever used crowdfunding to get information out about your disease state or to try to help raise funds to pay for treatment? Okay, so a couple of you have. So if you're not familiar, well, actually, one of you want to explain how that works when you do that?
Well, we have a rare disease group, and we decided to go to a site. There's many sites out there, but we chose to use First Giving, and I gave all our membership a template that talked about the rare disease of cardiofacciocutaneous. I put my son's picture up there and told the story of how it affects the human body, and then the purpose of what we were raising funds for. And then our family members just took that template and made it their story, and then that went out through their Facebook site to all their family and friends. And I think that year we raised, about $18,000 for an event. So that's what
That's wonderful.
crowdfunding is.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert on it, believe me. I've learned it from other people. I'm really not tech savvy. I tried to tweet and having problems.
Well, I mean, yeah, tell us about your experience with it.
Well, I'm the patient. I thought I was in room number 1. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, you're
but
fine.
But this is
I'm
great
glad you're
too.
here.
Actually,
Yeah.
because this pertains to a lot of people in our community. But last year we have what we call our Catastill Awareness Month is November of every year, and we actually have a certain day too. But November is the year. But Every Life Foundation. And some of you may be aware that they do this, and you may not. It is so awesome. If you contact Every Life Foundation, you can ask them for a month, and they will match all your donations up to $1,000. So if you raise $1,000, you're going to get $2,000. And I don't remember the person that I contacted, but I think just a general email or a tweet or something to Every Life, they would connect you with the person you need to be connected with, and they would put you on the schedule. You do have to have kind of a marketing plan. They tell you what's expected of you to do in order to do well at this, because they only want you to be successful. So we did it last November. It wasn't as successful as we had hoped, so it actually was below our own expectations. But at the same time, it was more money than we would have gotten in November, in any other way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an innovative way to raise funds.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit, when I'm talking to you about Mariah, about some of the challenges, though, that are sometimes exemplified in sharing things online, right? The greatest thing is to be able to go viral. It's also sometimes not great because it can create its own problems and it's hard to control the message. And I think that this case in particular demonstrates sort of the unique challenges of rare disease caregivers. So this is Mariah. It's her birthday, her second birthday. Her mother says, I need money to go to Memphis, Tennessee for specialist treatment. So she creates a crowdfunding website. Mariah's got chromosome 2 duplication syndrome, which means that she has frequent seizures. She's on multiple medications. She's not growing as quickly as other children. And she also has what is essentially a terminal illness. So you have that sort of fighting against the disease as well. Now, this next part's a little bit sensitive, but I'm going to share it anyways because I think this is important when we talk about caregiving. So Mariah and her family were actually cyberbullied. The photo that you just saw was taken and turned into a meme. So if you're not familiar with memes, it's when you take a photo and you add a caption and you make a joke out of it. And so she was called several really awful names. She was called a monster, a leprechaun, and the photo was shared thousands of times by people on Twitter and Facebook before it sort of caught up that, hey, this is a real person we're talking about. And the reason I'm telling you this is not to start the day off on a bad note, but to point out, to be the caregiver in that situation, to be the mother that's having to struggle with that, I think exemplifies some of the challenges that you have in the rare disease community. You have this challenge where you've been saddled with a burden of educating others. If the disease is one that's not visible, trying to convince people that they need accommodation, even if they can't physically see the need for accommodation, is another ongoing issue. And so as a case study, we can see sort of the good side and the bad side of the internet, right? So we have the good side, which is that because of all this attention, Mariah and her family were able to connect with other caregivers. So you can see on the side, I've got some of the comments on the crowdfunder page. They raised a ton of money, so they were able to go to Memphis and get help. But when we look at it as a whole, we see there was sort of a lack of public understanding and empathy. So we have intense emotional stress on the family caregiver. We have a burden now on the family caregiver, not only to educate friends, family, and social circles and those in their community about the disease, but also to educate physicians, to try to convince doctors and health insurance companies, hey, this is a real disease, trust me, I know what the right treatment is. And then in addition to that, you've got financial strain, treatments that aren't covered by the government or other health insurance, so now you have to crowdfund. You've got lack of access to specialists that require you to travel across the country to get care. And you have, I think, something that maybe we haven't talked about enough, which is that process of knowing that the person you're caring for has a terminal disease in some cases, or it's uncertain how long the prognosis will be, and you are balancing grieving and bereavement for that person at the same time that you're trying to celebrate the time that you have with them. And that is an incredibly stressful burden for caregivers to hold. Now, I don't want to say it's all bad news, right? We know that caregiving is an extremely meaningful experience. We know that being able to connect with other caregivers adds a lot of social happiness to your life. When they do studies of people who care for persons with dementia, in some cases they actually predecease the person, but in others they live longer because they were able to find more meaning and purpose through that process of caring for someone else. But what I am saying is that when we talk about caregivers, we need to be able to articulate to other audiences why it's important to address these challenges. So what we do at the Alliance is we work with other companies, many of whom you can see listed here, to describe what caregiving is and why it's important. So the first thing I want to do is tell you a little bit about the study we just did, and then I'm going to tell you why we need to do something like this in the rare disease space. So the study we just did was a study of about 1,200 family caregivers across the US. We had oversamples for people who were 75 or older, as well as multicultural populations. So this would be African Americans, Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Hispanic and Latino groups. And we took that data and examined who family caregivers are in the United States as part of continuing work that we've done since 1997. So with AARP as our partner, we did an estimate of how many caregivers there are in the US across the board. So this is people caring for infants all the way to end of life. So there's 44.5 million caregivers in the US. And AARP, doing initial analysis on that data, found that if we were to take all of those caregivers and replace them with direct home care workers, we would value that at $470 billion a year. So that's huge, right? And actually, you can go, if you look up, there's a study called Valuing the Invaluable, which is cited at the bottom of this slide. And you can also find state-specific data about caregiving and economic value per state. So I would encourage you to think about that if you're doing state advocacy work. When we talk about what these people are doing, we sort of split it into three terms: activities of daily living. So this is sort of the physical, hands-on caregiving. Instrumental activities of daily living, this is running errands, financial management, that type of work. And then medical or nursing tasks. So this would be, changing a catheter, dressing a wound, that type of hands-on activities that a nurse might do in other situations, but you're doing because essentially you've been asked to do that. One thing we took a special look at is what we call higher intensity caregivers. And these are people who provide at least 21 hours a week providing care. So that's essentially a part-time job, just providing care to someone else. On average, these types of caregivers provide 62 hours a week. And that's a combination of activities of daily living, instrumental activities of daily living, and medical and nursing tasks. One thing I think is fascinating here is if you look at the breakout by ethnicity, if I can go, see if it'll let me go back. The breakout by ethnicity at the bottom there, you see among people of color, we have higher rates of higher hour caregivers. So there's this sense that in some communities that people feel like they have to take on more. And I think that's another area of risk that we should sort of keep in the back of our minds as we ask families to take on more and more, especially in a changing health system. Now this is sort of the, what are you actually doing? So you can see, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see a breakout, 0 to 20 hours and 21 plus. Anytime you see a little asterisk or a star there, that means it's a statistically relevant difference. So for example, people who are doing at least 21 hours of care are doing way more activities of daily living on the average. About 3 out of 4 are doing one combination of these things. So getting in and out of chairs, getting dressed, bathing, showering, helping somebody eat. Same with instrumental activities of daily living. These are things like transportation, grocery shopping, housework, and so on. And most caregivers are helping with medical and nursing tasks. Now I put a little arrow right there on 21 plus because not only are they helping with medical and nursing tasks, but for those who are those really intensive caregivers, 83% are helping with medical and nursing tasks. And the reason that matters is because more than 8 out of 10 in that higher hour caregiver category help with medical and nursing tasks with no prior preparation. That means that a doctor said to you, okay, you're going home and you're going to do all this medical task, you're going to give injections, you're going to do wound care, and there's been no training or preparation for the person to do that. Now think about, as a caregiver, how intensive that is to be asked to take on a medical task. I can tell you right now, my background is a lawyer. I get nervous around needles. If somebody said, hey, here you go, here's this pack of needles, have at it, I would be terrified. And we know from the research that caregivers are scared of that. They want to have that training and preparation and education on that. I think the other thing that's important here is that caregivers in the most complex care situations are also performing medical nursing tasks without any prior preparation. And we also see a relationship there with caregivers that are experiencing high burden. So this is an area where we could do a lot more in preparing caregivers for the responsibilities of caregiving. So I'm going to take a break now and ask if you've had experiences where you're helping with medical nursing tasks and how you got prepared to actually do that work. So I don't know if anyone feels comfortable sharing.
One sec. Wait, whoa, we need a mic.
Oh.
I had to learn how to be very aggressive and to just demand that they show me how to do things. And I just showed up at the doctor's office. I'd show up at the hospital and say, I need help with this. And that's how I learned.
I'm sorry, Kim.
It's okay, I'm getting my work because I need my cardio.
Same thing happened to me. I don't have major medical issues, but one of mine was asthmatic. And I wouldn't leave the doctor's office until I knew what I was doing. And if it took extra time, it took extra time. And even to this day, I still say to them, occasionally they'll say, well, this, and this. And I'll look at them and go, English, please. I said, I have no idea what you're talking about, and I'm not leaving until I'm sure I do know what you're talking about. I know one of the biggest challenges for us that we've discovered, at least I've discovered, is, and I'm not finding a lot of studies about it or a lot of research, is for the genetic families. When the parent has the same thing as the child,
Yes.
and they're the main caregiver, and they're also dealing with their own issues. And I've run into doctors who say, well, do this, this, and this for your son. And I'm like, people, somebody remember that I'm getting tired. You know what I mean? That I've got my own issues going on. But there hasn't been a lot of research as to families where it's being passed down and everybody's dealing with the same thing.
I think that's a great point. I think that this is, again, something that we see in the rare disease community that's sort of unique. And I think finding ways to articulate that to policymakers so that they understand that we're talking about intergenerational. I mean, we see it in some other disease states, but I think that's a really important point.
I had to help with medical tasks as well. My mom had to have injections, which I'd never done before, and I was told by the nurses how to do it, but never shown how to do it. So actually, going home and doing that was different. I learned, but it was not a comfortable thing. And, as you said, I'm not a nurse, so I had no real training in doing this. I think one of the biggest challenges when I was caring for my mom is that she had a disease that was not well known. She had different oxygen needs than what medical professionals are typically trained for. And so over the course of 6 years in caring for her, I spent a lot of time educating, pushing, arguing with, doctors and nurses in hospitals about her needs, because they have they have their education and what they know is to be true, but her needs were different. And it was very difficult because I'm not a medical professional, so I was simply told, you don't have the training, I have the education, I spent the time in school, you're just a caregiver. And that's a very difficult crack to be stuck in. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later on, but including the caregiver as part of the medical team, saying that we trust you just as if you were an OT or a PT or a nurse's aide. You're part of the decision-making team, and especially in a situation where you're caring for somebody that maybe has impaired cognition or is a minor and needs somebody to be the person who's making the medical decisions. I think that's really important.
Sorry. I'll come back. I'm sorry.
That's right.
It's all good.
Hi. Okay. My daughter's 9, but she was diagnosed at age 15 months with a motor neuron disease, spinal muscular atrophy. And I had a little bit of a different approach. I still work in a very high-stress corporate job, but I took a different approach with getting the diagnosis. Had to wait for 2 months to get that. And then I went to a conference. It was the Families of SMA conference. Now they're called Cure SMA in Boston. That was really helpful because they had a standard of care for SMA. And I took that standard of care as the Bible, and it came in very handy because as soon as I went back home, my daughter was hospitalized with pneumonia. And no one knew crap about SMA. No one had a cough assist. They didn't know anything. So what I did was I leveraged that standard of care. And I said, I was in the ER with my daughter, and I said, look, I know you're trying to save her, but you must use the standard of care. I forced them to look online, get the standard of care going. It made a tremendous difference to Sutter Memorial. And so now they know me, and they are helpful. They still don't have a cough assist. I'll have to talk to the medical director about that. But if there are resources, that's the tip that I learned. And now I'm like a respiratory care specialist, not by training, but I know all the things, all the machines, and I've had to train my nurses because honestly there isn't any specialists that know anything about the standard of care, so I continuously leverage the information. And I do get educational fatigue. There are times when I don't want to tell anyone what to do, and they should know, but sometimes you just have to push through and partner to get the change you want, and that's been encouraging. That's why I'm here.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I think there's 2 things I take away from that. First, I think it's very commendable what all of you are doing, especially coming here and engaging in global genes and activating to the degree that you can in the healthcare system. But I think there's sort of a second point that I take away from being a policy person who's in the DC area, which is that to me that's a sign that the system is not aware of how to interact with caregivers of persons with rare disease. So what can we do to tell that message? And I think the third thing you hit on that was really important is this idea of being in the workplace and caregiving. And I'll take a break because I see we have another comment.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
Lisa Scheuer with the Restopathies Network USA. I had a son with Castello syndrome, which is one of the restopathies, and very medically fragile, and I wanted to add to hers over there. After actually one lesson in changing central line care stuff, the ports, and after fighting to be in the post-anesthesia care unit, I mean, literally screaming fights because my son couldn't advocate for himself, and he was 5 years old, I saw the PACU nurse not do it right. You know, it was totally non-sterile, what she was doing, because her goals are different. It's just the airway. And I actually stuttered and got her to do it right. And then she said, oh, is your child immunosuppressed that she's going to get the package? So, after learning, we have to be advocates back to the health providers. And I know that there are statistics that show that families that care for somebody with a central line do a better job at keeping the person from getting infected than professionals.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I think it comes back to this issue of people not being educated on the disease. And to some degree, right, every practitioner is not going to be educated in we're talking about 7,000 rare diseases in addition to a host of number of other diseases. But I do think that there's probably an opportunity here to come and say that there are certain general characteristics that you should be thinking about when you're dealing with a family that's managing rare disease. And in caregiving in general, one of the things we know is that in addition to the government providing support, workplaces are another place where it's important for the private market to engage. So we know that 60% of all caregivers were employed at some point in the past year, and that most of those caregivers experienced one of the impacts listed here to their job. So that's things like you had to go in late, you had to leave early, you had to take a leave of absence, you had to reduce your work hours in order to meet the demands of caring. You maybe received a warning about performance, gave up work entirely, turned down opportunities for promotion, or even retired early or left the workforce because you had to because of the demands of caregiving. We know that primary caregivers are more likely to report that caregiving impacted their work, as well as those that said they had no choice. So we have sort of an interesting question in this report about choice, and it can be taken one of two ways. Some people may read that and say, I felt like I had no choice in the caregiving responsibility because it was never a question. I was always going to do this because that's just who I am. Some people look at it and they say, especially maybe with an older parent, I felt forced into it. I had no choice. And regardless of how you approach the question of choice, reporting that you had no choice is associated with higher burden. So it's something to think about. How can we make people feel like they, as caregivers, have more autonomy in what they can and will take on? And how can we encourage other people around the person who needs care to take on some of that burden so that the caregivers don't feel like it's something sort of a situation of last resort? We also have situations where you see about a little more than a third of caregivers left their job to provide care, and about a third left due to lack of flexibility. So you can begin to think about what could an employer do. Maybe workplace flexibility is one. Maybe protections against discrimination is another. So there's a lot of options there. The other thing I want to point out is sort of this issue of being highly stressed. So experiencing emotional stress is more common in that higher hour group, and it's more common with people that said they had no choice. So just thinking again about what we can do to get at some of those health stressors in the caregiver themselves. So let's do another question.
Is we refer to our syndrome, there's less than 100 of us in the world with our exact duplication, and everybody besides us is more severe than us. But we refer to our lives as a whack-a-mole game. You're constantly on stress level because you don't know if you're going to wake up and have everything's going to be fine, or all of a sudden someone's in the hospital or someone needs a root canal. And you just never know from day to day, and it's like, it's your life. And I think that adds to the stress when you don't have any answers. and especially if you're trying to work. We were in that situation with no choice, because both of us couldn't work full-time. And I could go 5 or 6 months with nobody having issues at all. Then all of a sudden, excuse the French, all hell can break loose,
Yeah.
and I can need 2 weeks off in a month, and I don't know till the day before. And that can add to your stress too when you don't know what's coming. You try, but you don't know whether you're gonna have an easy day or all of a sudden everybody's gonna need you at the same time.
Yeah, and I think, there are some public policy solutions that try to get at this, but they're not very easy to navigate. So we have Family Medical Leave Act. I think a lot of employers are kind of unsure how that works for caregivers, less so than maternity or paternity leave. In California, you actually have paid family and medical leave through the Family and Medical Leave Act, but a lot of people aren't even aware that they're able to take advantage of that. It works sort of like an unemployment insurance deduction from your paycheck. So it takes out $1 a week, and if you have to take off time to care, then you're able to do so at about half of your normal pay. But I think the thing is that services like these that are available, the little that is available in the US, most people aren't even aware. And in other cases, people feel afraid of talking to their employer about what it means to be a caregiver. So if you look at this graphic, this is something for a coalition we work with on this issue of caring in the workplace. And what they were trying to do was create a one-pager that you could take into your boss and say, look, these are all the things I'm balancing as a caregiver. I'm balancing having to research the condition and the things I have to do at my house, even basic things like clean my house. I'm balancing traveling to work and meetings and projects with caregiving activities like managing medications or going to doctor appointments or even personal care for that person. And then one of the things you hear in the dementia community a lot is if you see 2 people walking down the hall of the doctor's office and one person is perfectly groomed, their hair's done, they've got their clothes are ironed, and the next person is standing there disheveled, which one is the caregiver? And most people say it's the person standing there disheveled because they care so much about the person they're caring for that they'll do all these things and then they forget to take care of themselves. So I don't know if anybody has thoughts and wants to weigh on how you have balanced, if you found balance between work and caregiving and everything else that you have going on in your life.
Here and then here. Okay. Should have worn flats.
Okay, I took a job with a company that works with the type of disorder my son has. So they're very understandable if I need to take time off of work and they don't count it against me.
That's great.
So
That's wonderful. Have others found something that worked for them, or you still sort of navigating, or did somebody try to talk to their boss and it didn't go very well?
Well, I took a couple of leaves of absence. I've now reached a point of 0 available. I took 9 months off because I got burnt out from caregiving and working a high-stress job. I gave that feedback to Cisco. They're a fantastic, very flexible company. They have a third-party leave vendor, so that helps. But I was pretty brutal in my assessment with the leave because they were a little bit harassing. That's just how it is sometimes. But I came back, and my manager's very supportive. I was not expecting that necessarily, but I just kept my attitude very open. I've never hidden my disease, the disease my daughter has. I had to take a calculated risk, I felt. So some people are not comfortable with that. I can understand why. But I figured that SMA was going to be part of my life anyway. Why hide it? And if someone wants to employ me, then damn it, they're going to need to know that, because I'm a hard worker and a very professional worker. So, I've been fortunate to have a really big company support me. There's been 1 million layoffs every year, but for some reason they don't lay me off. That's good. And also, I had looked into just recently if I should leave the workforce because now I'm a single parent, but dad's still in the picture. And I don't think public assistance is for me. The pay is horrible. I want you to get to the pay factor and IHSS. But, that frightened me. So I'm still in the workforce. I'm still able to manage because my daughter's doing okay, pretty good. But not everyone has that choice.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point, right? Is that aspect of it's not just being able to continue to work but being able to have a career, a fulfilling career, being able to still be considered for promotions if that's what you want, you know, and maintain some of that individuality.
I was very lucky and blessed that I lived in the state of New York, so my child was immediately put into the Medicaid waiver program right when he came home from NICU. But I also, like you, did not hide, and because I was a special education teacher, after he stabilized enough, I decided to utilize my skills I learned at years ago, meetings at NORD, Genetic Alliance was around, and I gave back then to the school district, and I started doing programs within the classrooms to educate the kids on rare diseases, and now the big thing is, of course, anti-bullying, and I've retired, but even 3 years ago, I went in on Rare Disease Day, and then I utilized the kids that we had within our school district if they chose to work with me and educate teachers and students. So I kind of flipped it around, and everybody was just so wonderful to me in my school district. But the one thing I hope you address later, and maybe I'll talk with you later, our rare disease group that I'm fortunate to run because I had summers off and decent hours as a teacher, was just the impact on the stress, especially on most of the mothers. And like, I've developed so many medical problems myself now with psoriatic arthritis, GI problems, and then my husband had a heart failure, was airlifted for a heart transplant, and all I kept thinking was, damn it, he can't die on me, we're a team, and I was pissed, you know,
Yeah.
but he survived, and he was a miracle, so, you know, I'm blessed. But then you get the double stress that's going on with the
Right.
child, and what happens to you, and what's going to happen when I die, you know, that kind of a stress. I have real high anxiety. So we want to bring in somebody, I don't know, like you or other people in the country to work with our families on, because one of the mothers posted like she was on medication. I'm like, heck yeah, I've been on meds since my son was diagnosed. Don't be ashamed of that. If it makes you functional, it's a good choice.
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to segue from that and skip forward a little bit. I'll just let you know if you go to the website, when we passed the stuff out, there were 2 handouts. So the yellow one is about if you're starting your own coalition, if you want to do something specifically for caregivers, some of the resources we have available for you. And the blue one, the Forbes article, provides an overview of this report that I'm sharing, and at the back there's a link to the report. So I'm going to move quickly through this just because I know we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to talk about the rare disease piece. But it does talk about what types of policies would be helpful, such as including caregiver name on a medical chart, having respite available, and so on. It talks about financial policies, which, you know, this makes sense, but it sort of breaks out by income level. So if you were lower income, you wanted a stipend. If you were higher income, you wanted a tax credit in general. And then also information needs. What kinds of things would be helpful to caregivers? So information on keeping people safe at home, managing stress, and end-of-life decisions were 3 of the big categories that caregivers wanted more information on, but particularly you'll see 87% of the higher hour group and 82% of the lower hour group, they wanted more information on everything. So I think the work that you guys are doing to educate people is really important. So in general, we have some broad recommendations in the report that deal with identifying high-risk caregivers, helping in the workplace, helping those new caregivers that just found out that they'd be caring, and offering training around medical nursing tasks and advanced care planning. But I think we need to talk a little bit about rare disease. We've been sort of hitting around it. What do we know? So we don't know a lot about caregivers across the board, right? We know a lot of academic information about specific groups of caregivers for individual rare disease populations. And we know that Shire did a wonderful white paper a couple years ago that studied about 256 caregivers, finding some of the things we've been talking about here. High rates of depression, anxiety, and stress, feelings of isolation from your family, and worry based on future outlook of the disease, getting at this question of uncertainty that we keep hearing about, not knowing what the disease is, and then not knowing, once you know what the disease is, what the treatment's going to be or what the future looks like. So why do we need more on rare disease caregiving in particular? Hopefully at this point you're already thinking about why we need that, But to me, these are some of the big factors that are sort of unique to the rare disease community as compared to other patient populations. So misdiagnosis, length of time to diagnosis, uncertainty, risk-benefit analysis. This is huge. Knowing how much risk you can tolerate on behalf of the person you're caring for, knowing how much risk that person can tolerate versus benefit of a new or experimental treatment. Access is huge. Participation in clinical trials. And then the other one, sort of the one that we haven't talked much about, the palliative care and terminal illness. Awareness of palliative care, use of it versus other types of treatment. I think the other thing that's unique is the role that caregivers, especially parents, play in a primary function of being the person who manages medications and manages health care as well as coordinating school work and all these other things. And this is something that I'm going to take a break and see if you guys have other things you would add. This to me is the biggest reason why we need something specific to caregivers is because our needs are different, right? I mean, they overlap. Certainly, if we help the patient, we help the caregiver. But helping the caregiver, really caring for the caregiver is bigger than that, right? It's not just about improving the health of the patient, but it's talking about how we include the caregiver in the healthcare team, how we make workplaces more flexible and friendly towards healthcare needs, how we increase respite care, or increase training and education for medical tasks and activities of daily living. And of course, there are shared things like financial, emotional care, self-treatment, access issues, medication issues, but in general, because the needs are different, in order to get support for caregivers and families, we need to find a way to articulate those needs. So I'm going to stop and see what your thoughts are in terms of other things that maybe aren't covered on the caregiver needs that we would want to know more about.
And thanks. Because of my issues, I can't drive. She's had to start taking on the caregiving needs. And she doesn't, we've discussed it before. One of her big challenges is she has the same syndrome I have. So she's seeing emotionally, she said once, she's looking into the future right in front of her and seeing what could happen to her. And she's been phenomenal. But I think they need to start, she brought up the fact that they're talking about the coming tsunami of autistic adults who aren't going to fit in anybody's program. And she said what nobody's addressing is when something happens to the parents, there's going to become a coming tsunami of autistic sibling caretakers because those kids still aren't going to fit anywhere. But the other thing that with the caregiver needs, you were talking about financial support, is in my situation, we've been trying to get Social Security for me because obviously I can't work, I can't drive. And when I went before the judge, I explained the situation that I cannot drive and I'm in a rural area with no transportation. They cannot take that into consideration. And when I explained to him that even if I could drive, I can't work a 9-to-5 job, I can't guarantee that tomorrow I won't need 6 weeks off. There's no guarantees here. I freelanced for 25 years because of that. I said, you've got to understand I'm the primary caregiver and I'd love to work 9 to 5, but realistically, that ain't working. They will not take that into consideration that you're a primary caregiver. And that's huge. Because if I wasn't caregiver, yeah, I could work full time. But they need to start coming up with, and the other thing that we've dealt with too is, I was 25, so about 23 years ago I had to go to freelance because there was no way both of us could work full time. And there needs to be some kind of state or federal funding out there so that when you've got a 2-income family that through no choice of their own has to give up one of those incomes, there's some way to compensate for it. Most of these 25 years, I've been working every shift, every freelance job I can get, and my husband's been working 2 jobs because it's the only way we can make it work. And there has been no financial compensation for us. We've had to do it all on our own for 25 years.
So I'm going to say something that maybe sounds a little cold. I want you to take it as I live within the Beltway, and we are probably cold. And that is to make that case to Social Security, we've got to have data, right? We have to show how big the problem is. Right. We have to be able to explain in quantifiable terms that a person sitting in a policy office will understand, because in personal stories, we hear a lot of stories like that. And I think the reason we need research on this is to be able to take these stories and wrap them up in a way that when we go to the Commissioner of Social Security and we say this is a big problem, we have something that we can put right in front of her, and it's not just her taking our word on it.
My daughter has said several times she's seen her friends, and I have the syndrome, and she has to kind of help me out with the two brothers because they have the issues. And she said, they're both 20, she said, I'm 25, I look at my 25-year-old friends, and she said, their life is so simple. She said, they can go out at night and have a party. She said, they can go off with friends. And I always have to check to be sure somebody doesn't need something first before I can just. And the other thing I'd like to see, I'm going to tie it up, but the other thing I would like to see in caregiver needs is, and I brought this up, one of the programs I'd like to see is our hospitals. We have medical genetic homes where we go to our doctor. You know, this is our home, this is our geneticist. None of the hospitals have medical genetic family homes. If I go for my son, we deal with his issues. If I go for me, we deal with my issues. But with all of us having the same syndrome, it's like a spider's web. What affects me also affects my son, also affects my daughter. And there's no clinic or group that deals with how it affects each other. And that really needs to happen because it's desperate need out there for it. That it isn't as simple as me not being able to drive. My son's an hour and a half away from us. He got sick at school, couldn't go back on the van, couldn't get a hold of my husband because he was working. My daughter had to leave work and drive 3 hours to pick him up and bring him back home, and then go to work that night. And it's not that simple as just it's his issues or my issues. It's, as my daughter said, what affects one of us, it's like a spider web. It has repercussions for all of us.
Yeah, I think, and I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, I think it's that again, it gets at one of the unique things in the rare disease community, especially with genetic disease, is caregivers with the same condition. I mean, we heard that last night with that powerful movie about Huntington's disease. You know, that it's something that's running through your whole family.
Hi, Andra, Lipodystrophy United, and I'm a parent, but I'm not a caregiver, I'm the patient. But as the representative of the community, this topic is a huge issue for our parents. And I think what I would add to the caregiver needs slide, and I don't know how to say this in a concise way where you could add it as a simple bullet, but is the idea that the caregiver has to figure out the balance in the family. Potentially not all of the children are affected. And I think so there's the patient need, the caregiver needs, and then maybe the family needs. It almost needs its own bubble.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's a big area where I can only refer them to our nurses, but I feel like we could do a better job as a foundation providing them with other resources.
That's wonderful. So I know we're right at the top of the hour. Just a couple of parting thoughts. The first is, more than anything else, one thing that we would like to see is the people to think about caregivers not just as an intervention that's helping improve the life of a patient, but as sort of a whole backbone that's supporting, it's sort of like a family unit, right? Like we talk about patient and family-centered care. So health as something that's bigger than just one individual person. I think one thing, I guess sort of buried the lead here, but we are working with Global Genes on a study of caregivers of persons with rare disease. It's in the fundraising stage right now, and we have commitment for about 10% of the funding. And we've been working on it a couple of months now. But when this study comes out, there'll be an opportunity for you as patient advocates and caregivers to weigh in. And we would love your help in getting the survey out to your caregivers so that we can collect more data. We'd like to get between 1,000 and 1,500 respondents participating in this survey, and the reason for that is because it will be a big enough number of respondents to be statistically relevant and to really get the attention of policymakers and others. There's a little bit of study details there, and then when you have access to the slides, we've also included some resources on caregiving that I would encourage you to check out if you haven't already. I know that there are limited resources in the US and that this information sharing is one of the best ways to find out how to support yourself as a caregiver. And then the last thing I would just leave you with is I'm just tremendously honored to be able to be here with you guys and to learn about what all of you have done. And this work is really important to us. So I would encourage you to come and find me afterwards if you've got additional thoughts, if you think it would be really helpful for me to have a study that addressed certain pieces of information that maybe I didn't have. My door is always open to you, so you're always welcome to call or email me or to share ideas. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time, and I've got my email and phone here, and I have some cards too, if that would be helpful. And thank you very much.